Hello, and welcome to another episode of AI in the Classroom Daily. This is a podcast helping educators make sense of AI without the hype. I'm Dan Cogan-Drew, co-founder and chief academic officer here at Newsella. And I use AI as a thinking partner in preparing each of these episodes because I think the best way to talk honestly about AI in education is to work with it openly. So as you know, on Fridays, we take a moment to step back from the day-to-day and look at the week in news as it relates to AI in the classroom. And we'll pull 3 stories together this week that we think are worth your being aware of. So the first story is about what we'll call the watermark arms race in AI detection and AI provenance, whether something came from AI and what that means. We'll talk about that in a minute. The second is the release of results from a survey by Common Sense Media of over 1,000 high school students describing their use of AI. And the third is an update from the federal government offering guidance on education technology, something we haven't seen in quite some time. So we're going to just unpack briefly what that entails. So to our first story, this is a follow-up story on the news last week of Anthropic releasing a watermark embedded in all text that Claude generates or processes. And this is a key clarification that the watermark is applied to text not just that Claude has generated, but that Claude has touched, in a sense, has processed. The goal for Anthropic was to provide a way to identify whether the model touched the content in order to satisfy compliance with the EU AI Act. And the update this week is, as you can imagine, as soon as that watermark was announced, immediately people started building removal tools. And in less than a week, searches for AI watermark remover jumped 60%. An open source GitHub project called watermarks-removal amassed more than 15,000 stars, and an AI educator created a web-based tool to strip the markers called watermark-remover. So those who are seeking to push back against the creation of the watermarks, the insertion of the watermarks, the use of them, and also advocate for their removal are taking a stance on the basis of privacy and attribution. They're not trying to deny that AI was used, but I think the larger point, if you're an educator following this story, is that the watermarking is not a detection strategy. And if you're working in a district that is considering watermarking as some kind of a watershed event that opens a new opportunity to more reliably, verifiably detect AI, I think we need to put this story in the context of one more chapter in an ongoing arms race. That is, every time there has been a detection tool or a watermark introduced, there is a counter development designed to strip it or elude it. And we don't see signs with this watermark and the response by watermark removers that this dynamic is going to stop. So this is not a reliable plateau or a foundation on which to build your AI detection strategy. Next story is Common Sense Media releasing the results of a survey of more than 1,000 high school students. And it confirms a lot of what we've been talking about on this show. For example, 70% use AI for schoolwork. And as we know, the conversation around AI is not keeping up with the use. For example, 73% of teens say that a teacher has never talked to them about how to use AI safely. Something else that the data shows is that among students who are using AI, 63% are offloading critical thinking. That is, they're getting answers from AI and either using them as is or minimally reworking them and then using them. At the same time, however, 38% of the respondents said that having AI access leads them to generate fewer of their own ideas, and 39% feel like they're missing out on learning. This is also consistent with a lot of the sort of mixed feelings that we've detected in the way that students are using AI and how they feel about that use. Part of the picture also to consider from the results of the survey is that in the absence of dialogue with a teacher, there is still surveillance by the institution. 44% of students have had AI tools blocked on school devices, and 59% of those just switch to personal devices, which have, of course, zero oversight. So in sum, we see teens using AI more than ever. We see very little development by way of conversation with students about this use, persistent surveillance, and persistent evasion of the surveillance. And we also continue to see concerns expressed by students in the impact that AI has, not just on their current learning, but on their future prospects. When they are asked about what skills matter for the future, they are identifying non-AI skills such as collaboration, critical thinking, reading complex information. All of this, they're telling us, should not be automated. They know that these skills shouldn't be automated, and they see them as uniquely human. To sum up what's notable in this survey is that we continue to see echoes of a theme, which is that there is a lack of conversation and dialogue happening, both within districts, amongst teachers, between teachers and admins, and certainly between teachers, admins, and their students. Students are using the technology, they're finding ways to get around surveillance, but there is not a public conversation happening that is reaching them that explains when it should be used, when it shouldn't be used. And as a result, the bans that are coming down are creating invisible behaviors that are going to be increasingly hard to detect because, of course, the surveillance game is another form of arms race, and there will always be evasion as much as there is surveillance. On to our third story. The Department of Education issued its first significant guidance on education technology that we've seen in years. And the core message was that technology should be, quote, purposeful, instructionally sound, and contributing to measurable student outcomes. This framing is helpful because the guidance is telling districts that they need to evaluate EdTech on learning outcomes, not just on screen time or login frequency. And the amount of screen time that students are exposed to has been conflated with the value and time that they might be spending on useful screens. So we're starting to see a distinction here from the federal government between all screen time and screen time that can be meaningfully purposed for learning. The federal government is also praising states like Arkansas, Indiana, and Texas that are shifting towards performance-based contracts instead of just adoption metrics. So that's helpful, but we should keep in mind that this federal guidance is just advisory, that it's not regulatory, which is to say it has no enforcement mechanism. So a state or a district can take this guidance under advisement, or they can ignore it. If you're reading this critically, you might say that this is helpful in terms of the focus on outcomes, but it's also not establishing any kind of a national floor around privacy, accessibility, or data protection. This is still guidance, which means that the way this is received and implemented from state to state, from county to county, and district to district may vary tremendously. The variation, in other words, continues. So those are our three stories. Each one of these is going to be an ongoing item that we'll continue to track in the news. We see AI detection and the games around watermarking and removing watermarking continues. We see that teens are continuing to use AI on their own for the most part, absent a lot of conversation or dialogue with their teacher. And again, there's a felt absence of dialogue in the public space in school communities around the use of AI. And then we see some guidance coming from the Federal Department of Education, trying to distinguish between screen time that is used for learning versus screen time that is used for other things, and an emphasis on outcomes-based, performance-based contracts versus just adoption-based metrics. So thanks as always for tuning in. We will see you again with a fresh story on Monday. Have a great weekend, everybody.